So Jim mentioned I'm here to talk about migrations, but before we do that, I want to talk about something slightly different. I want to talk about moving. So by a show of hands, how many people in this room have ever moved residences? Okay, I just want to keep your hands in the air. Keep your hands in the air. I'm just going to take a picture of this, and afterwards, after the conference, I'm going to tweet it out with the message, delighted by the response to my question in my Roachfest session, how many of you are planning on migrating all of your workloads to CockroachDB? So thank you very much. Actually, just if you could get your hands back up, everyone who answered yes to that first question. Please keep your hands in the air if that experience of moving residences was fun. Okay, so moving is not always fun, but there's a reason that we do it and we continue to do it. Maybe you're living in a starter home and you need to move out of that starter home to get some more space. Or maybe a new job that you've just taken is moving you to a different city. Or maybe you're starting a family and you need some more space in your home. There are a lot of reasons that we continue to endure some effort to move. And the same is kind of true with databases. So with CockroachDB, there are a lot of benefits to moving. Maybe that's the advantage of knowing that you can scale your workload at any time without any application changes. Or maybe you want the ability to survive more than just a node going down, but an entire data center failing. Or perhaps you're trying to deliver a true low latency experience for your users that are spread out throughout the world. There are reasons to come to CockroachDB. And there are reasons that many organizations will go down the path to migrate their workloads to CockroachDB. And like any move, if you're well prepared, migration to CockroachDB can go pretty well. If you have to make sure that you plan things out throughout the whole entire process. The way a migration to CockroachDB and moving are different is that no poorly planned migration can be helped out at the last minute by calling up some of your college buddies and offering them pizza and beer to bail you out. But we're here to help you with that. So if there's one single thing that you should take out of this presentation that I'm giving today, it's that we are here to help you on your journey to migrate your workloads to CockroachDB. Full stop. I'm going to keep talking about that throughout the presentation, but I want to make that clear, that we are partners in this journey on your migration. For the rest of the presentation, I'm going to talk about what that typical migration journey looks like and a couple of tools that we're launching to help you in that process. So here on the right side of the screen, you can see what is a typical journey to CockroachDB. First, you need to take the schema that exists in some other database platform, whether that be Postgres or Oracle or SQL Server. And you need to migrate that schema so that you get the same functional and performance characteristics that you're looking for in your, that you're experiencing today in your database on CockroachDB. So once that schema is migrated and you have the basic structure of your database in CockroachDB, the second phase is to do a partial load. And customers will often load part of the data so that they can then proceed to the third step where they're doing this functional and performance validation to make sure that everything's working kind of properly. And that phase is kind of iterative, load some data, do some functional and performance evaluation, and so on. And then finally, you get to some stage where you have some confidence in what you're going to land on CockroachDB. And at that point, there's this full data load stage where you're pulling everything that you have from your production system today into CockroachDB. And finally, when that's complete, then you can move all of your applications over to CockroachDB. Okay, so today, what we're doing is we're launching two tools which are going to make several of those steps a little bit easier. The first is what we're calling the Schema Conversion Tool, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit. And the second is support for AWS's database migration service, which helps you move the data over and perform some of that schema conversion as well. These two tools we're blanketing under this umbrella name CockroachDB MOLT, which I like to think stands for Migrate Off Legacy Technology. Okay, so first let's talk about moving your schema to CockroachDB. So to make that easier, I'm going to demo just after this slide this new tool that we've created called the Schema Conversion Tool. We're pretty excited about it. Hopefully after the demo, you'll be excited about it as well. The idea behind the tool is that it's pretty simple. You upload a schema file that's a PG dump from a Postgres instance, and it will walk through the entire schema that you have line by line and show you which statements are good for CockroachDB, which ones need some changes, which ones we'd suggest to make some changes for the performance, to achieve the performance characteristics that you'll want from a distributed database system, because as we know, they're architected differently, they have different performance characteristics. The end result is you have all of these incompatibilities addressed very quickly and very easily, and hopefully that will be made clear in this demo that's coming up. Before we roll the demo, though, I just want to lay some ground rules for this demo. I was hoping to do a live demo today, but logistically it wasn't going to be possible. So instead, I want to assure you that I recorded this demo last night in one take, and there's no speeding up of the demo at any points in time. The demo I'm preparing you now is 9 minutes long. And at the beginning of that demo, we will have 0 presence on a CockroachDB cluster. We will create a new serverless cluster, and we will migrate our data over there. At the 9-minute mark, you will have a migrated schema in a CockroachDB cluster that you can now start loading data into. So with that in mind, let's roll the demo. OK, so we're going to start with this schema file that we want to migrate. And it might be hard to see from the back, but this is a Postgres PG dump file that was taken from version 14 of Postgres. And you can see there's some statements in this file that constitute the schema. There's actually over 100 statements that we want to migrate as part of the schema to CockroachDB. So to do that, we're going to close this file, and we're going to first create a serverless cluster, because we're going to start with 0 presence on CockroachDB. I'm doing this in our staging environment, so I have to name the cluster. But once I name that cluster, then I'm going to click on the Create button. And again, didn't speed this up at all. The CockroachDB cluster is going to be created, and 3 seconds later, it's done. So we're going to now just provide some SQL user permissions. And then I'm going to ignore this connection string dialog. And now we have our cluster that's up and running. And you'll notice if you're a serverless user, we've just recently added this bottom tab, the Migrations tab. And that's where the Schema Conversion Tool starts. The journey starts. So we're going to take that file, this schema file, and we're going to drag and drop it into the schema conversion file. Now, behind the covers, what's going on is that we are trying to run each of those statements in that schema file on a backend database. And we're evaluating for each of those statements whether or not they will work or they won't work in CockroachDB. And we're providing some recommendations in cases where things won't work, or in cases where there's an opportunity to make the cluster run more smoothly with some minor changes to the schema. So this takes a little bit of time because we're actually performing the schema operations on a backend database. But when it's done, you're left with this summary report. And the summary report contains a few things. So on the left-hand side, it shows you the total statements that are in the schema and how many have encountered errors, as well as how many we have suggestions to make run faster. There's a little bit of text that accompanies this and tells you how difficult it will be to migrate. For those who are more visually inclined on the right-hand side, we have the same data that's broken down into graphs. You can see that most of the statements here are OK. There's one or two that are hitting unimplemented features. There's one that didn't get executed. And then there's a whole bunch of them that are failing because we're missing a user. So we're going to be able to fix that one pretty quickly. And then the bottom panel shows the suggestions as well. So this is just the summary report. But if we click on the statements panel, then we can go statement by statement and start migrating this schema. So the first statement here, I don't know if you can read it in the back, but we have this suggestion to set the default insize environment variable so that the behavior of CockroachDB more closely matches the behavior of Postgres. So if we want to accept that, we just have to click on the right-hand side to say acknowledge, and that suggestion will go away. And you can see there's a whole bunch of statements here that are successful. You can see that by this little green circle on the side with the check mark in it. We just want to look at the failing ones. So we can collapse all of the successful statements, and now we can start working on the failing ones. We can see the first one here is failing because we're trying to alter a table and change the owner, and we don't have that user. So we're going to create that user through the dialog, and that just takes a few seconds. And you can see that we've resolved that error, and we've resolved a bunch of other errors where we're trying to use that user throughout the whole schema. So that's great. We've just resolved a whole bunch of errors just using the dialog. Down here, we have another suggestion. We're suggesting that you use a UUID instead of a sequence. The issue there is that sequences, because they have to be monotonically increasing, require a whole bunch of communication in a distributed system. So the performance of UUIDs is much better. I'm not going to change the schema at this point, but I'm just going to acknowledge the error or the suggestion and move on, just for the sake of time. So we're now going to scroll down to the next error, and you can just use these buttons on the side, and that'll take you right to the next error. This one's kind of interesting. This schema contains the use of a Postgres extension, this pgstat statements, which in Postgres helps you determine where you're spending your time in your statements. CockroachDB has all of that functionality built in. So we can just delete the create extension here, as well as the next statement, which is commenting on that extension. So we can get rid of those two. And then that should just leave us with one more error that we need to fix. In this case, the table is using an XML type, which CockroachDB doesn't support. We're going to quickly change that to a JSON type to fix the schema. And then we're going to save that new statement. It's just going to take 1 second. And at this point, we should have resolved all of the errors because we're now down at the bottom of the schema. And we can verify that. You can see it says no more errors available at the top. So we're going to go back to the top, and we're going to retry this migration by clicking on that button that says retry migration. OK, so when we click on that button, what the retry migration does is the exact same process that we did at the beginning. So it's going to take the modified schema with all of those statements removed and modified and so on. It's going to run them against this backend database that we created. And for each of the statements that we're executing, it's going to determine if they're problematic or not for CockroachDB. And that's going to continue for a little bit. And then we should get this new summary report that will tell us the current state of the world. This takes a few more seconds. And there we go. So now we have this new summary report, and you can see that there's now 0 errors. So we've fully migrated this schema to CockroachDB by eliminating all of the errors. There are still a few suggestions on this page, and I'm going to scroll down a little bit to show you what some of those suggestions are. We have this UUID to sequence one here, and there's another one down here. And then if we scroll down a bit more, you can see that there's a table that's missing a primary key. And we recommend that all tables in CockroachDB have primary keys, especially in cases where you're moving data into them and you want to use some replication technology like DMS, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit. Having a primary key is important. I'm just going to acknowledge these for now and not change the schema. But I want to show you what this leaves you with, because at the beginning I promised you that you would have a database at the end of all of this with your schema in it. And the way we do that through the Schema Conversion Tool is by clicking on this Finalize Schema. And this brings up a modal which now allows you to finalize that in the database form. There's actually 2 options here. One is you can download the modified schema. This is good if you want to upload it later, or if you want to keep it for record keeping to see the differences between the old and the new schema. If we open that file, which we downloaded, it looks pretty similar to the pgdump file that we had before. There's a bunch of statements. It says that this one was generated by CockroachDB using the schema tool. And you can see all of the statements are here, over 100 statements. But what's more interesting is if we can take that and drop that in a database. And we can do that through the finalized schema by just putting a name in the database name tab. So we're going to put in a database name here, and we're going to click on the finalize button. when we do that, what's going on behind the covers is it's taking this temporary database that we've created and giving it your name, and then opening it up. And when it completes, we're done. You have a database that's available to run. If you click on this link on the Finalize Schema tab, it will take you to the Cockroach Cloud Console, where you can see the database that we've created for you, and all of the tables that are within it. So when you're done 9 minutes later, you have your database up and running, having started with no cluster at all. We think that this tool is pretty powerful, and we're very excited about it. If any of you are interested in using it, it's available now in preview. We launched it this morning. You can start off with a serverless cluster, and like I said, be ready in just 10 or 15 seconds to start using it. If you start using it and you have any suggestions as to how to improve it, we're all ears. You can either hit the Get Support button on the UI, or you can hit us up in Community Slack. Okay, so that covers the first step of migrating the schema. But then we need to get the data into CockroachDB. And really, Cockroach offers a whole bunch of mechanisms to do that. If you're coming from a Postgres environment, we offer full support for the copy statement, which is very common for Postgres DBAs, and they use it very commonly to move their data into CockroachDB. We also have built from the ground up the import tool, which some of you may be familiar with. The import tool is copy re-envisioned for a distributed world. And one of the advantages of rebuilding an import technology for a distributed world is we can take several files and run them in parallel across a number of nodes. As a result, if you're bringing data into CockroachDB, I would encourage you to use the import option, because it can be orders of magnitude faster than running in copy, which all routes through a single node. If you're looking at doing more low downtime migration, we have a couple of options. The first is what's called CDC Sync. And this really started as a side project of a developer here at CockroachDB. But now we're using it more and more for low downtime migrations, specifically from CockroachDB to CockroachDB. And that can be helpful in cases where you want to move your self-hosted environment to Cockroach Cloud. And finally, today, what we're announcing is support for AWS Database Migration Service. And that provides you push-button migrations from any existing database vendor to CockroachDB. OK, I'm going to talk for the rest of this presentation about how AWS DMS works, how you can set it up, and then I'm going to have a short demo about that shows the migration into DMS. So the idea with DMS, if you haven't heard of it, is it's Amazon's database migration service. It allows you to migrate between any two endpoints that you've created through the AWS UI, and I'm going to show a little bit about how that works. What I personally find kind of cool about DMS is that it works for SQL Server, it works for Oracle, it works for MySQL and Postgres and a whole bunch of other database sources, which is great. CockroachDB, if you're configuring it, and I'm going to show this a bit in the demo, you want to specify it to run as a Postgres source, target. And that leverages our Postgres wire compatibility. Amazon thinks that it's moving into Postgres. In the end, the data ends up in CockroachDB. And what's important is that your cluster doesn't need to be running on AWS to use DMS. DMS requires that only one of the endpoints, either the source or the target, be on AWS. So if you're moving to a Cockroach Cloud instance on AWS, your source database could be self-hosted or in another cloud provider. OK, so let's walk through how you would configure DMS to make this all work. There's a few steps to the process, which I'm going to walk through. The first is creating a replication instance. A replication instance is really just an EC2 instance that's running the DMS code. All of the data has to flow through this DMS instance to get replicated from the source to the target. It runs the DMS code, as I mentioned. It stages all of the data, so you're going to want to size this this replication instance proportional to how much data you're moving. And we have experts on our team who can help you size these clusters if you're interested. It can also run in a highly available configuration, so that if your replication instance fails, another one will take over where the replication left off. So then once you have your replication instance, which is really doing the bulk of the work in the DMS process, you need to set up a source and a target endpoint. And in this example, I'm going to be migrating from an Aurora Postgres instance to a CockroachDB instance. And on the right-hand side, you can see that the target is specified as Postgres. And this is what, as I mentioned before, you're going to want to migrate to a Postgres endpoint, which CockroachDB will be impersonating. And once that's done, you need to create your migration task. And really, this is what stitches everything together. So you have this replication instance, which is performing the work. You have a source on one side and a target. And we can stitch them all together with this migration task. So you can see here, we have a migration task, which is going to replicate the data from our Aurora Postgres endpoint to our CockroachDB target. And there's some options as to how to treat the schema on the target side, which you can set up. So with that, you can roll the demo and we can show this all in action. Okay, so this is what the DMS landing page looks like. And on the left-hand side, you can see all of the stages. So here you can see that we have our replication instance, which is called AJ Storm Migrations. And this is really just an EC2 instance that's running the DMS code. The difference is that it has a public IP address so that it can see the sources and targets if they don't exist in DMS. On the endpoint side, I've created two endpoints, one for the Aurora side. That's listed as a source endpoint, and you can see it's coming from Amazon Aurora. And on the target side, we have this going to a CockroachDB instance in our internal Roach prod environment. And that is using this Postgres endpoint type. Again, leveraging our Postgres wire compatibility. And then finally, to stitch everything together, we have this database migration task, which if I click on, will show you that it's ready to run, it's ready to be created. It's first going to perform a full load of the data, and then it's going to replicate all of the data that has come into the system between the time that we started the full load. It's going to do that from the Aurora instance to the CockroachDB cluster. Now, before we get this started, I'm going to show you what's going on behind the scenes with the actual databases. So we've got Aurora on the left and Cockroach on the right. I'm going to select from this T table on the Postgres side, and you can see there's 6 rows in that table. And on the Cockroach side, there's nothing. So now we're going to start this replication task. And when you start it, you can see that Amazon's telling you that the task is started. And it's going to start pulling data from this Postgres side, and it's going to be loading that data into the Cockroach side. If we now select on the Cockroach side, you can see the data has all been moved over. Now, this is obviously a pretty trivial example, but I want to show you that it's not only this initial load that can occur. If we start inserting values onto the Postgres side, we will see that they get replicated too onto the Cockroach side. And you can see here that if we select again, we have now 7 rows in the table when we started with 6. And it also works for updates. We have some data sitting in a Postgres database, which now may be incorrectly named because we're moving it over to CockroachDB. So we can now update all of the Postgres values in the table to Cockroach values, run that statement, and that update statement will then get reflected on the target side as well. So there you go. Very, very trivial, simple example of AWS DMS. We are launching it today publicly, but we have customers who have been using it in preview support for several months now and have been seeing very spectacular results with moving large amounts of data in a very seamless and quick fashion. If you're interested in learning more, we have this fully documented in our documentation, how to set up CockroachDB to use AWS DMS. Okay, finally, there's this third step, which I haven't really mentioned at all. And this is really about functional and performance validation. And this is where I want to reiterate this whole point about us being here as a partner in your journey to CockroachDB. We have sales engineers who combined have decades and decades of experience in CockroachDB and performing these migrations, we're very successful in migrating customers to CockroachDB. And you don't have to take my word for it. You can look at our blog, where we have several case studies of customers who have migrated from Oracle, who have migrated from AWS Aurora, who have migrated from Postgres, and are now happily running on CockroachDB. I'd also encourage you to talk to other attendees of the conference. I know that there are other great migration stories that aren't reflected on our blog, aren't public references, but the brain trust in this room and at this conference around migrations is enormous, and we should be using it. And finally, I mentioned off the top that if there's one single thing that you should take out of this, it's that we are here as a partner in the migration story. And as with the moving example, sometimes when you have a great partner in the journey, it makes everything a lot easier. Thank you.